Hello, everyone. I am so excited for you to join us today, and I'm even more excited that today's speaker is Mr. Bharon Hoag. Let me just tell y'all, he is a self-proclaimed chiropractic groupie, and he'll be the first one to tell you that ever since I heard those words come out of his mouth, I cannot help myself but to say it every time I get the opportunity, and the great pleasure to introduce him. For those of you who may not be familiar with him or have not had the incredible pleasure of seeing him and hearing him speak live and in person, trust me, it is an experience you do not want to miss. Um, he is currently serving the profession as the executive director of One Chiropractic, which is a nonprofit organization focused on attracting like-minded chiropractors to move in a unified effort to educate the world on the power of the chiropractic adjustment. He has been a leader in healthcare for almost 2 decades, has worked in the chiropractic profession for 18 years, taught for 16 years, and has developed his unique non-doctor approach through ownership and management of numerous clinics. He is the past executive director for the Ohio State Chiropractic Association, where he was there for 6 years. Where he made some major changes and really changed up the model of how state associations were managed. Some pretty incredible stuff, and how I had the great pleasure of getting to know him. But with this new venture at One Chiropractic, he really gets to fuel his passion and purpose for the profession, and it gives him the opportunity to harness the power of the chiropractic patient and drive for chiropractic in healthcare and to ensure the individual chiropractor has the tools they need to succeed in this profession. So I'm going to shut up now and turn it over to my dear, sweet, beloved friend, Bharon Hoag.
Well, thank you, Christy. As always, it's an extreme honor to be able to come and speak on behalf of ChiroHealthUSA, and I appreciate this opportunity. To the rest of you, welcome. You are either sadistic or really have no life at all if you're sitting over lunch learning about documentation and coding, but I appreciate you coming and being a part of our time together today. My commitment to you is to try to do my best to make this as interesting as I can. I know that coding and documentation and compliance, they often are just major downers. You walk away wondering why you're still practicing most of the time when you go to events that are talking about these topics. So I try to make it intentional to try to find a way to educate you with the tools you need, but also inspire you to want to go and serve more people. My personal mission in life is to make chiropractic the #1 healthcare choice in the world. And the only way that happens is if I can get chiropractors fired up and I really on passion for helping more people through chiropractic. So when I teach things like coding and documentation and procedural type stuff, I want to make sure that you're inspired through that process. So I do want to let you know that there is a question and answer feature to this service as well. So as I'm speaking and going through things, please don't hesitate to ask a question. I will do my best to make sure that they're all answered. Also, my information should be available to you as well. You can email me at any point. I have nothing to sell you, so I'm not a consultant. I don't do anything like that. So I'm really here just to try to provide some information and give you the resources you need to have a clear mind and a clear heart to go out and serve more people. So with that said, let's get rocking and rolling. So I first want to talk with you really about chiropractic, because I think it's important for you to understand our history, kind of where we kind of came from, to understand why it is the way it is today. And unfortunately, the history of our profession is really not taught very well to a lot of the newer chiropractors. And so I think it's worth its time to look back at the track record and kind of why we evolved into the way that we did. And so I'm going to give you kind of a Cliff Notes version of our history. So obviously, we know that chiropractic started in 1895 in Davenport, Iowa, with D.D. Palmer and his janitor. I know there's some debate about whether that was legitimately the first adjustment, but we're going to go with that for the sake of today. And from that point in 1895, probably up to around 1975, although the profession has always had kind of the straights and mixers, and we've always kind of had multiple viewpoints, we functioned relatively well together, moving in a specific direction. Everybody was really on board with telling the story of chiropractic, what makes us separate and distinct in our efforts. If you think of the Wilkes case, where it was Dr. Wilkes against the American Medical Association. Really, the argument in that process, the entire profession got involved in this particular lawsuit, and that argument was the proof that chiropractic was separate and distinct, and therefore it wasn't practicing without a license in those arguments, but it also was showing that the American Medical Association was communicating inappropriately about chiropractic to their students. And so throughout that thing, we were all really focused on telling the story of chiropractic. Well, and the reason 1975 is an important date, really 75 through 85 was a very important time for chiropractic, because it was kind of all of those years that we had fought, almost 100 years, we were fighting, telling the story of chiropractic, saying that we were separate and distinct, that we had a value within the healthcare system. We were fighting to be acknowledged. Well, in 75, the last state in our country, Louisiana, actually started licensing chiropractors. And so all 50 states at that point were now licensing chiropractors and recognizing them as a chiropractor or a chiropractic physician or whatever that particular state defined the language, but they were identified, and we no longer had the threat of chiropractors being imprisoned for practicing without a license. So that was a significant win that the entire country and profession was really fighting for in these individual states. Not only did Louisiana start licensing that, we also had Medicare understood what chiropractic was, and we were able to get language within Medicare where they classified us as physicians for the purpose of identifying and treating subluxations. So you had the last state licensed, you had the actual federal government acknowledging chiropractic, and then once the federal government acknowledged it, we now also have insurance companies that started to acknowledge it. And we now had CPT codes. We created our own 989 series codes. And everything seemed to be working in our favor. And we call that period of time the Mercedes 80s. This is the time that chiropractors were really paid for breathing in the presence of a patient. And it's just amazing to think back to that time. They were very busy. They were getting paid very well. Everyone was happy. Well, here's really what started the issues that we're dealing with today. Because in that period of time, everybody got in network because all insurances started paying. The HMO world started declining. The PPO world came in, and everyone was doing fantastic. It was wonderful. And then all of a sudden, the bottom fell out. You have the late 80s, early 90s, we had this creation, quote unquote, of managed care. And managed care came in selling the biggest lie that I've ever heard. Now, we could go down the path of pharmaceuticals. They spend a lot of time lying as well. But in the insurance world, the biggest lie that was ever told was this concept of being in network and being a provider. And when you're a provider, they came to us and said, listen, we want to make you part of our provider panel, which means you're the best of the best in your area. Little did we know they were saying that to everybody in our town. But nonetheless, you are the best of the best in our town. We're going to ask you to take a little bit less money, but we're going to send all of our people to you. And we were like, sure, there's money to go around. And we all got in network. And then over the last 20 years, we now know the story is they've cut and cut and cut and cut and cut reimbursement. The only place that I know that's actually getting increases in reimbursement is Nebraska with Secure Care, or other states that have Secure Care in it. I know Minnesota's getting some blessings right now through their work with Secure Care. But most of the country is getting cut when it comes to reimbursement, because they sold us this lie of being in network, and that if we weren't in network, we couldn't survive. So over that 20-year period, our profession started getting squeezed. They were seeing as many or more people than they were in the 80s, but they were making less money. Well, the minute you start affecting someone's pocketbook, you start changing their vantage point of life. So I tell you all of this history because it's very important for you to understand the reason we are where we are today is because our profession bought the lie back in the mid to late 80s of getting into insurance, and we felt that we had arrived. It's kind of like going on a diet. If you go on a diet and you're trying to reach a certain weight and you get to that weight, what is the first thing you typically do? You reward yourself and you go eat bad, right? Once you achieve your goal, you kind of stop the fighting, and that's kind of what our profession did. And this slide here pretty much tells the story, right? You know, we went from the focus of our profession as telling our story, saying we're separate and distinct, creating value for the services we're doing, and 100% of our energy went to reimbursement. And how can I prove that I'm right on this? Open your average chiropractic magazine, whether it be your state association or Chiro Econ, American Chiropractor, Dynamic Chiropractic. Look at any of those journals, and most of it's about compliance and coding and reimbursement. Look at the seminars that are offered. There are so many of them. Yes, there's some technique stuff, but most of it's coding, compliance, Medicare, documentation, insurance reimbursement. How about the conversations you have in your practice? How many of you are legitimately sitting down talking about ways that you and your team can impact your community with the story of chiropractic? Or how often are we talking about how to get people to make their payments and their co-pays and so on and so forth? I'm telling you, I've been in this profession for 20 years now, and I've served in every capacity I can other than being an actual chiropractor, and the conversations are more about reimbursement than they are about anything else. People are angry, they're frustrated, and so we carry this negative energy into the concept of documenting and coding. And so I want to flip that today. The rest of the day today, I want to talk to you about how can we actually use documentation to tell the story of chiropractic. How can we actually stick it to all of the reviewers, all of the people within the insurance realm, all of the third-party managers like your Ash and Optum and all those different groups, all the people that are basically finding ways to not pay you. How can we use their very same rules to actually force them to have to pay? And that's the game for me. That's what's fun about teaching this to doctors, is it's not like you have to do this or you're going to pay a fine. It's like, no, let's do it so we can shove the truth right where the sun doesn't shine. And that's really what I'm after. I want to shut down these people that are restricting access to a profession that legitimately can change the entire landscape of healthcare. And I'll be very transparent. I am the biggest groupie in the profession of chiropractic. I believe that if we were used appropriately in the healthcare system, we could balance the federal budget. I've drank the Kool-Aid. I'm telling you, I have a friend that tells me, yeah, Bharon, but you just poop rainbows. So, you think everything's going to be great. And yes, I am a very positive person. I actually have facts to balance up that if chiropractic is used appropriately and people understand the story of chiropractic, we literally can, hands down, really eradicate a lot of the chronic conditions that are bankrupting our country. And so that's what drives me to do this. So, folks, I'm telling you, we have to get back to telling the story. We have to get back to telling the story. And I know that each of your stories, right, we have about 50 people on this call right now. Each of you have a different story, and that's fantastic, but it's your story, and that's what needs to be told. You need to stop changing who you are to comply with these different groups. Believe it or not, they were never created to change who you are. These guidelines, as I'm going to show you today, were actually created for you to be able to tell them who you are. But we've just been lied to for so long from different consultants and different companies, people that make money out of keeping you afraid. I want to break those bonds, and I want to give you a freedom to say it's okay to love and serve your people, and we're going to teach you how to communicate that. Because believe it or not, it's far easier than what most people have shared with you. So I want to, before I get off my little soapbox here, I want to share this with you. This individual's name, you need to write this name down. I highly recommend you Google him. His name is Simon Sinek, and he's got an 18-minute TED Talk video that I highly, highly, highly recommend you take the time to watch. As a matter of fact, I'm encouraging you to actually have your staff watch this same video. I've done so many office trainings around this video, getting people to change the way that they view what they do. But Simon teaches people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. Now catch this, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And then what you do simply proves what you believe, right? We spend so much time talking about our what that we stop remembering about our why. So when I teach CAs, which I love talking to staff because I believe they have such a powerful role that they should be serving within our practices, but they're not turned on enough to do it. I ask the staff to ask their doctors two questions. Question number one, why did you become a chiropractor? What is your story? And some of you need to remember that. Why did you become? And maybe we have some staff people on this webinar now. Ask your doctor, what is their story? And I'm not talking about the Cliff Notes version. I'm talking about the long, romantic night with candles story. Like, what really was your path? Why did you make the decision to become a chiropractor? Because that story is so important to reignite in you a passion of remembering why you do what you do. Because people don't come to you because you're a chiropractor. They should be coming to you because of why you're a chiropractor. Maybe your passion is you want to make sure that every child is adjusted before they turn 2 weeks of age because you believe you can eradicate chronic conditions in an entire generation if we can get to these children right at birth. Or maybe your purpose and your why is to make sure that we reduce the amount of injuries that athletes have, or those that get injured, we actually reduce the impact of that injury on their future play. So we want to work with as many athletes as we can to increase peak performance. Okay, whatever your why is, why are you doing what you're doing? Because that's ultimately what's going to attract people to you, right? And so maybe you say, Bharon, I hate insurance. I don't want to deal with insurance anymore. I'm going to say, okay, that's fine. But why do you want to treat your people? What do you believe? Are you a wellness mindset? You know, maybe you are an acute pain person. I have a lot of chiros that I love that are just, I only want to see people for 6 to 8 visits and then send them to someone else that wants to keep them well. I like the cases. I like getting people out of pain. I'm not into talking to them about why they should stay out of pain. That's someone else's gig, and I'm okay with that. What is your why? Because people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. All right, now, what stops you from doing this, right? What stops you from saying, okay, screw it. I'm moving in this direction because it's what I believe, and it's this word right here, fear. You as a chiropractor or you as an office person in a chiropractic office, believe it or not, the majority of the decisions you make, because statistically humans make more decisions based on fear than they do belief, right? We do these things because we're afraid of the outcome. We need to change that, right? We need to do things because we believe in the outcome we're going to produce, not do things because we're afraid of a bad outcome. And I know this sounds very minuscule, but I promise you, when you change the way you approach life and you're doing things because you believe in them rather than you being afraid of them, it alters your method, it alters your energy pattern, and it ultimately alters your outcomes. So here's the best definition of fear, and maybe this will get through to you. Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thought of the future. It's a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. This is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. I mean, think about that. The best part of this definition for me is it's a product of your imagination causing you to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. And that's crazy to me that we make so many decisions off of things that don't and probably will never exist. Well, the same thing happens to you when you're looking at charting and documentation and compliance. I mean, how many of you guys have stayed up at night worrying about HIPAA compliance? Because they keep throwing at you $10,000 to $50,000 fines if you don't do this, that, and the other thing. So you keep buying these $1,000 compliance programs, and they sit on your shelf because you don't know what they mean or what they're supposed to be about. Or how many of you go to a Medicare seminar and you're convinced that you are never seeing another Medicare person because you're not going to prison? Because they keep telling you, if you do this, this, and this, you're going to prison. And so fear is what paralyzes you when it comes to documentation. So rather than going back to your practice saying, I want to see more people, you go back to your practice saying, I really don't want to see anybody because I don't want all the paperwork that's tied to it, right? That's the fear side that I'm talking about. So as I go through the requirements and as I go through your documentation guidelines, please don't view them as I got to do this or else I'm going to get in trouble. I want you to look at it saying, I'm doing this because I want my story to be told. Because Medicare, believe it or not, the framework that they teach you is very simple to tell your story. And that's the whole objective. We don't do this because we're afraid of being audited and fearful. We're doing this because we want the story of chiropractic to be told in every possible platform we can in our country, in our world, for that matter, right? So you're not making decisions on fear. You're making decisions on belief because belief empowers. Belief multiplies. Belief creates. Fear destroys, paralyzes, and controls. All right? So I'm off my soapbox now. Hopefully that gives you a decent foundation, but it's so important that as I go through this information, you're looking at it from the right lens. You are no longer allowed to be afraid or concerned or derogatory when it comes to documenting, because I'm going to simplify this like you've never seen before in your life. It's pretty awesome stuff. So how do you tell the story, right? So I'm telling you, we've got to get from focusing on reimbursement to telling the story of chiropractic. Well, ultimately, there's 3 basic ways that you tell the story. The first is you need to know your ICD-10 codes. Yes, I know I need to fix my slide there, but it's ICD-10 and your CPT codes. You need to understand that your ICD-10 and your CPT codes are literally words in your vocabulary. So they literally are like the, or and but, or house, or car. They are words. All of those have definitions that tell a story. So if you're choosing the right codes the right way to tell your story the right way, you're going to be much more comprehensible, if you will. Your communication strategy is going to come through a lot cleaner than if you're just throwing things on a claim form because that's what gets you paid. And I know just from a percentage of the majority of you on this phone, you put things on claim forms because you think that's what's going to get you paid. If they told you to paint a purple unicorn on the claim form, you would if that got you paid. And that's my problem. We shouldn't be allowing them to dictate to you what's going on with your patient, right? I mean, I've been in the industry long enough to know there are payers that say, we don't cover that code, but if you bill this code, we'll pay that. And you're kind of sitting there thinking, well, that's not what I did, though, but they told me to put that code on there, so, okay, that's what I'll put on the claim form because that's what they said, right? So we're allowing them to tell us what diagnoses we can use. We're allowing them to tell us what CPT codes that they'll pay for. And believe it or not, if you go deep enough into the law, they're not allowed to dictate that, but we give them that authority because of our ignorance. So know your codes. They're not very many. We use about 10 to 15 codes in the chiropractic profession. It's not that big of a deal. ICD-10 obviously complicated things a little bit more, but even that's not that difficult of a process because we pretty much deal with what we deal with. So it's not like we have to memorize the entire book, but know your codes. So then once you know them, you've got to choose the right ones to tell the appropriate story. You know, the example I give to you is this. The conversation you're going to have with your buddies in the bar is going to be very different than the conversation you have with a 10-year-old. It could be the very same topic, but your story in the bar is going to have a few more superlatives than what you're telling your 10-year-old, right? So we alter our conversation constantly throughout our day-to-day life. It's no different when you're in the coding world. Just because you did 156 things on the patient that day, you need to choose the right codes that tell the appropriate story for the framework that you're in. The conversation you're going to have at church is way different than the conversation you're going to have in the bar. It doesn't necessarily make you a hypocrite. You're just being more sensitive to the environment you're in. It's no different. Medicare wants it communicated a certain way. Blue Cross wants it communicated another one. Allstate wants it communicated another. That's no different than any other area of your life. Know your codes and then choose the right codes to tell the story for the appropriate framework. Very simple. And then lastly, document to support the codes and your need for care. That's what we're going to focus on today. I have an hour to give you this information. So I'm just going to focus on this last bullet point, which is documenting. And hopefully, you know, you'll get your coding knowledge from your state associations or from some other event that you attend. But for the purposes of today, we're going to talk about the documenting side of things. All right, so this slide is the best slide I could possibly have when I talk to people about compliance. I hate the word compliance. Compliance has gotten such a negative connotation because no one understands the rules. So you feel it's near impossible to be compliant. And there's such a negative thing, and we have thrown so much money at this word as a profession that if we could pool that money, we could probably buy, 15 years of Super Bowl commercials that actually tell our story rather than a bunch of people throwing money into a black hole. Here's my deal, and I have to be careful with this because I don't ever want to give anybody bad advice, but you are no longer allowed to be worried about compliance. Guys, this stuff's very, very simple. The rules are created because of idiots. Somebody did something so stupid and extreme that someone created a rule to stop that from ever happening again. But it was really only ever one or two people that did it. But they just never wanted to deal with it again, so they created a rule. So you need to be conscious of the parameters in which you're supposed to practice. So let's use HIPAA for an example. HIPAA has 1.5 million different rules. Some of them apply. Most of them don't even apply to you because you have less than 10 employees. But nonetheless, it is not. You don't have to be Fort Knox. Your server does not have to be so secure that you could run a porn site off of it. I mean, it's just not necessary, and everyone's scaring the bejesus out of you to try to make you HIPAA compliant. Yes, is it real? Yes, it does. Chiropractors are underneath that. But you are not allowed to throw money at this anymore. You are not allowed to do things that paralyze you from wanting to serve people. If your core purpose is to love and serve, I promise you're going to be okay. It doesn't mean you have a right to be ignorant, right? I'm not saying just, throw it into the wind and say forget about it. But just be conscious, but don't be afraid of it. Because I don't believe it's even possible to be compliant because all these rules are so convoluted that they're going to find an issue if they want to find an issue. So just love your people. Be conscious of your information. Make sure you're doing a decent job of telling the story of the care you're providing, and you're going to be okay. I promise you. You can call me if you're not, and then I'll bail you out. But I don't want you to be paralyzed by this word anymore. But I also want to transform the definition of the word. Compliance is no longer about do's and don'ts. Compliance is being congruent with your own purpose. are you compliant to your purpose? Meaning, are you allowing anything to get in the way of what you believe? If you are, you're out of compliance. This is no longer about making sure you have a sign-in sheet or don't have a sign-in sheet, or you have a server that's got a binary code of 27 digits. This is about you being congruent with your own purpose. We have got to get back to being in love with serving people. When our profession goes back to its core purpose, we are unstoppable. And that's proven in the little history lesson I gave you in the beginning of this webinar, that if you look at the trend of what happened over those 70 years of us just telling the story and how we were able to get all chiropractors licensed in all 50 states, how we were able to get the government to recognize us, how we were able to get insurance companies to do it, all of that stuff happened because we just relentlessly told the story of chiropractic. You know, I luckily was blessed to be able to grow up in my chiropractic career in the state of Ohio, because Ohio actually had more chiropractors in prison than any other state in the country. And what that did is it gave me a lot of people to pull from. And it amazed me that back then when these guys went to jail, what do you think they did? You think they sat in their cell and they were mad and upset? No, they adjusted the other inmates and they adjusted the guards. They were so on purpose that even getting thrown in jail didn't stop them from adjusting. I would like to see us throw a couple of our current chiros in jail and see what happens. They probably give up their license to get out, right? There's a difference between our passion and our purpose than what we saw for those that were building the profession we currently practice today. We've got to get back to that. We have got to get back to being that belligerent about our love for what we do, that we're willing to fight against any model that isn't allowing us to do it. And right now, that model is managed care. That model and that restriction to access is because we've bought the lie that we have to be in network and we have to comply. So what I'm going to teach you for the rest of our time together is how you can mandate, how you can tell that story in a way that makes them understand it and makes them give you access, right? I can't, if a plan's only got 10 visits, it's only got 10 visits, but I'm talking about all this medical necessity garbage. I'm talking about all this, we just don't choose to cover that anymore. All that is going away because you're going to be so diligent in telling the story of chiropractic through your documentation that they're not going to be able to stop you from getting the care that the patient rightfully deserves. All right, that's my commitment to you. So, all right, I'm done with my soapbox stuff. Let's get to some tangible stuff. All right, so I think we can all agree that Medicare is the authority. If Medicare does something, pretty much the rest of the world does it. As a matter of fact, if you dig deep into most of your third-party contracts, your Blue Cross, your Aetna, your Anthem policies, you'll see language in there that says they default to the Medicare definition of medical necessity. So if you don't believe me, you're just going to have to trust me that Medicare is ultimately the authority when it comes to looking and overseeing the necessity of care. So that's what I'm going to focus on talking with you today. So Medicare has something called a policy manual. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but I want you to understand this, that Medicare breaks our country up into what they call jurisdictions. So depending on where you're calling from, like Ohio is jurisdiction 15, and we are managed by a company called CGS. I know First Coast is in Florida. I know Noridian is over part of the state. WPS is another contractor up in the Wisconsins and Michigan area. So they're called Medicare Administrative Contractors, or MACs. They are the ones that represent Medicare for certain quadrants of the U.S. But there is a federal policy manual that basically says these are the requirements, and then it's the job of the MAC to be able to administer the benefit and manage those claims. So they will have what's called an LCD, which is a local coverage determiner. But if you look at the LCD and you look at the federal policy manual, they're almost mirror image of each other's with some slight variations in the LCD. So what I'm talking to you about today is coming from the federal mandate, but it's also in all of the LCDs. So this is going to cover any country or any state that you're practicing in. These requirements are in your LCDs because this stuff that I'm teaching is universal across the entire country. So you don't have to worry about whether this applies or doesn't apply to your particular area, because it will. So in this policy manual, they are very clear. There's actually 8 to 9 pages specific to chiropractic. It's chapter 15, section 240. And in this, it covers everything from how they define a chiropractor to how you can prove the existence of a subluxation, what needs to be in your intake forms as far as gathering a patient history, what should be in your exam, what should be in your notes, how to define necessity. All of that stuff is in this document. It's actually a very easy document to read. When I learned it, I created all of my forms and everything right off of it. It became very simple. And that's what got me into teaching it, because once you read it at that level, it becomes very easy to understand. So I want to talk with you about two aspects today. We're going to talk about your treatment plans and your SOAP notes. Those are the two areas we're going to talk about, and then how that actually breaks up into proving medical necessity. So here's what Medicare says a treatment plan is. They state you have to give a recommended level of care, which is your duration and frequency, specific treatment goals, and objective measures to evaluate treatment effectiveness. So let's dig into this a little bit deeper. So frequency and duration. So I have to assume I've got varying philosophies on this webinar today. I've got some people that believe you should only adjust until someone's out of pain, and then I have other people that believe you should adjust until they stop breathing. So we cover all of those spectrums with our profession and the different belief systems. So I don't care what end of that spectrum you're on or where you are on that continuum. You have no business telling me how often you're going to see a patient past the first reeval. So when you give me frequency and duration, it should be 2 times a week for 6 weeks or 3 times a week for 4 weeks, at which time I'm going to reevaluate to monitor treatment effectiveness and modify the treatment plan as needed, right? So you're giving me a very specific time frame, because all insurance plans, Medicare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, all of them state that you have a certain period of time to measure treatment effectiveness. Some of them say a month, some of them say a few weeks. They all vary depending on the plan, but all of them expect you to do a certain phase of care to monitor whether the care you're providing is having the impact that you would hope it would have. So you need to tell me that. Now, here's the beauty of everything I'm going to tell you about a treatment plan. Most of you, just going off of national averages, most of you have pretty poor retention, meaning you're averaging maybe 6 to 10 actual visits per patient that comes in. And, now you're going to say, nope, not my office. We're about 24 to 36. Well, then if you're that high, it's because you're taking your total visits and you're dividing your new patients for that month into that total visit. But that's not true retention, because if you saw 400 visits that month and you saw 15 new ones, those 400 visits did not come from those 15 new patients. So that's a mythical statistic. You actually have to go and audit your records to determine what your true PVA is, which is how many active treatment visits am I getting from every new patient. If you've been in practice for 10 or more years, your numbers are skewed because you got people coming to you forever, which is wonderful, but they're coming 1 time a month or twice a month. That's not telling you how well you're managing your new and active patients. So that's the number that we should be looking at. So if you do this treatment plan the way that I'm talking to you, you will increase your PVA, because your patients will now understand why they're coming, and they know that there's a measurement period that they're going to better understand why they need to continue coming. Because most of you will talk about function, but your entire practice is based around pain. So when they start feeling better, they leave. Because that's how you define success, is when they're feeling better. How you doing today? How you feeling? Great, I'm glad you're feeling well. We're making progress. And so everything's about how they're feeling, how they're feeling, how they're feeling. And so when they feel good, they leave. Even if you tell them they need to see more. So if you do this treatment plan and you explain to them that there are phases to this healing process, that we're going to take them through phase 1. Phase 1 is 3 times a week for 4 weeks, at which point we're going to reevaluate, and we'll talk about the next phase of care at that time. Medicare requires it. You need to do it for patient management, and it also helps you to better gain control of your patient population. All right, so frequency and duration, pretty straightforward. Treatment and why. This is not a Medicare requirement. I added this because of my years of working with offices and dealing with IMEs and other managed care groups. I can't stand it when an auditor comes back and says, well, this particular method of treatment wasn't appropriate for this case. And these people have never looked at the patient. They've never seen them. They've never talked to them. They're looking at documentation, and they're telling me what should or shouldn't happen with the patient, which is very annoying. So I realize that that's happening because we don't do a very good job of explaining why we're doing what we're doing. So, for example, if I'm going to be doing electrical stimulation, I don't just say stim was done today. I need to say, based on the finding of spasms notated in the most recent exam, we're going to be doing electrical stim for the next 12 visits. Right? So based on the finding in the exam, we're going to be doing this treatment for this foreseeable time in the future. So it's not doing stim to reduce spasms. It's I'm doing stim because I found spasms. Right? You understand that difference? I'm not doing it to cause an effect. I'm doing it because I found an issue. Now, when you do it like that, it takes the power away from the reviewer to say that certain care shouldn't be provided. Now, the only thing they can do is say that the reason I said I was doing it, that particular therapy no longer accomplishes that goal. So if I said that I'm doing electrical stim to grow hair follicles, well, they could come around and say, well, listen, there is no literature that supports that electrical stim grows hair follicles. They could do that, but that would be their job, is to find something that proves me wrong rather than just outright telling me I can't do it, right? So you want to tell them why you're doing what you're doing, and that takes away some of the authority that they have. So frequency and duration, treatment and why, specific treatment goals. And this is a big issue because most of you have an EHR at this point, so you're trusting that your medical records or your electronic medical records are going to produce a great goal for you, but they don't. They all say the same thing. They all say to reduce pain, restore daily activities, and increase function, or something very generic like that. Well, Medicare specifically says specific treatment goals. So you can't have something that just arbitrarily says to reduce pain and restore daily activities. You need to get specific, but this is very, very easy. If you do your job in the consultation with your patient, you will find very quickly what your specific treatment goals are. And really, that's why is the patient coming to see you. Whether you know it or not, there's not a single patient that comes to you because they're in pain. Not one. Not one of them come to you because they're in pain. They come to you because their pain has gotten to a level that they can't do something that's truly important to them, whether it's work or play golf or lift their kid or sleep, that they finally decided to go and do something about it. So if you can figure out whatever that functional deficit is, that becomes a specific treatment goal. So if the patient comes in and says, I can't sleep for more than 30 minutes without having to wake due to pain, I'm dying, I'm not getting sleep. Great, my specific treatment goal is to allow the patient to sleep for 6 hours without waking due to pain. Or maybe the person's a runner and they're like, I can't even run. I have such pain going down my leg, I can't run. So the goal is not to reduce the leg pain. The goal is to get them back to running 2 miles as they were able to do pre-injury, right? So we have to quantify a specific goal that is a functional goal, not just reducing pain and restore daily activities. What daily activities are we restoring? So be very specific and make sure you can quantify it. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, Bharon, what about outcome assessment questionnaires, the Roland, Oswestry, things of that nature? And those are fine. I'm not against those at all. But again, you have to quantify it. You can't just say to increase the Oswestry scores or increase ADL scores. You need to be specific. My goal is to increase by 20% the Oswestry. Then I'm fine with it because it's something we can quantify over time. And you'll understand why that's important here in a minute. But specific treatment goals, right? We want to be specific to the patient. And if you do your job in the consultation, this becomes very, very easy. The last thing you need to do is monitor treatment effectiveness. Again, this is very easy if you do your job on the frequency and duration. If you remember, I said we're going to see the patient 3 times a week for 4 weeks, at which point we're going to reevaluate the patient to monitor treatment effectiveness and modify the treatment plan at that time as necessary. So as long as I'm clearly delineating that we are measuring treatment effectiveness and intervals, you're going to be fine. And here's just a side note on Medicare that is very, very important, and it's something that I find very interesting that most people still don't understand. Medicare is about episodes. There is a beginning and an end to every episode when it comes to Medicare. So you should have a beginning and an end to this phase. Box 14 on your claim form is basically the stopwatch clock. When you change the date in box 14, you reset the stopwatch. Right? So every time you have a new exacerbation or you have a new condition with your patient, you're changing box 14, and that starts the clock all over again. But you should have a beginning and an end to every episode, right? So by having these reevals in place, it helps you to manage the patient. But I'm also telling you your reason for doing this is not because Medicare says you have to. You're doing it because that's how to best manage your patient to increase PVA, to make sure they're getting the quality of care they need, so that we're keeping people at a highly functioning state. And that is our gift to mankind, is keeping people functioning at the highest possible level they can. That is what chiropractic does. And so you need to have this model in place to be able to ensure that you can do that. All right, so the 4 steps of your treatment plan: frequency and duration, treatment and why, specific treatment goals, and treatment effectiveness. Now, here's just a sample form. I don't know if you can see it very well. If you reach out to me, I'm happy to send it to you. I'm not suggesting that you go away from your EHR, but this form is completely created around what Medicare requires a treatment plan to be. This form has gone all the way through the different levels of multiple administrative contractors, Medicaid, major meds have all looked at it and said, if doctors would give us this information, we would be totally happy with what they're giving us. So if this form is something you're interested in, if you can see it, great on this. If not, I'm happy to email it to you. And just use it as a template. Don't go to paper if you're doing EHR, but just make sure your EHR spits out this information. But it's just a sample. This form can be completed in about 50 seconds. So less than a minute, you should be able to go through and complete this form once you're comfortable with what's on it and be completely compliant with Medicare. So no more narratives, no more dissertations to be able to prove necessity. It's literally 50 seconds. It's that simple. But we're telling the story in a concise, manageable manner, and that's where the power is for chiropractic. All right, so now let's go on. So subsequent visits, right? So we were just looking at what Medicare requires for the initial visit, which is the treatment plan. Well, now they're requiring on all subsequent visits, this is what they're requiring, which is essentially your SOAP notes, right? So they're looking for history. They want you to review the chief complaint, your changes since last visit, and a systems review if relevant. Then they want you to do a physical exam on each visit, which is an exam of the area involved in the diagnosis, assessment in the change in the patient's condition since the last visit, and then evaluation of the treatment effectiveness. And then the last thing, which is new, please pay attention to this, Medicare requires on each individual visit the visit number of the treatment plan, which I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's a new requirement in 2018 for all contractors. Let's go through this. Review of chief complaint, very simple. Right? You just need to, on each visit, give some kind of subjective summary. So that would be the patient presented today with continued low back pain, state that it's still aggravated while sleeping. Right? You cannot give me LBP is 6. That doesn't work. You've got to give me a true review of that primary complaint. Right? So it's the patient presented with continued low back pain, aggravated by sleeping. Right? Then the next thing that they require is how is that subjective complaint different since the last visit? So I would say patient presented today with continued low back pain. It's aggravated while sleeping, but states there is slight improvement since last visit. So that would be my subjective. Now, how you capture that is up to you. I'm still a huge fan of dictation. That's because I never shut up, and talking is a very easy thing for me. But, you know, whether you have an EHR or whatever you have, your methodology, but it should be something very similar to that. Patient presented today with continued low back pain. It's still aggravated by sleep, but they stated that it has slightly improved since last visit. That's it. That's your subjective portion, right? Then they want an exam of the area involved in the diagnosis. Well, if you would look further up into the carrier's manual or the policy manual, you'll see that it defines an exam as the PART, P-A-R-T, pain, asymmetry, restriction of motion, and tissue tone. So you need to have 2 of those 4, and I know I'm zipping through this, guys. I'm doing it because we're running out of time, but all this stuff should be pretty accessible for you. If I confuse you with anything, just let me know, and I'll definitely come back to you on the backside with it. But this is just basically saying the patient has spasm and fixation. You have to prove the existence of a subluxation on each individual visit, and you do that through the PART, the P-A-R-T, right? So it's very simple. All of you do it. You do some kind of assessment before the patient is adjusted. So you're going to just document what your findings are for that. Very simple. But here's the kicker, and this is where a lot of people get confused. So you also have an assessment of change since the last visit as it relates to the exam. So we know on step 2, we did changes since last visit as it relates to the subjective complaint. But now they also want us to talk about the changes from the objective or the exam. So is the spasm better, same, or worse since last visit? Is the fixation better, same, or worse since the last visit? Right? So think of it as steps 1 and 2 are about what the patient is telling you. Steps 3 and 4 are about you as a clinician, what you found, right? So you're telling me what you found and how that's different since the last time you saw them. Then you need to tell me the treatment effectiveness. How is the patient responding to the treatment? So if your goal was to allow the patient to sleep for 6 hours without waking due to pain, how are they doing? Right? I mean, are they sleeping a little bit better? Is the patient responding as you would expect? Are they not responding as you would expect? Just give me a general understanding. This is the one that gets a little difficult with the frequency in which we see patients, because if we're seeing them every other day, it's not like there's a ton of change. So don't be afraid of a bit of redundancy from visit to visit because of the frequency in which we see people. Now, if I look over a course of 4 to 5 visits, I should start seeing some kind of change, or at least a notation of your concern that there's no change. But I shouldn't just see same for 4 to 5 visits in a row. That's not an accurate assessment. Your patient's changing in some degree, and your documentation should support that. Next is the treatment you provided that day. That's very simple. It's basically I adjusted them, electrocuted them, and cooled them down with some ice, or whatever you did that day. Just tell me what treatment was provided. And then the new one is the visit number of the treatment plan. So somewhere on the note, it has to say this is visit 2 of 12 or visit 6 of 12. So if your treatment plan, your frequency and duration recommended 8 visits, then what visit number is this of that 8? So you've got to give me the frequency of your visit as it relates to the overall treatment plan, right? It's a very, very important thing. All right, so that is your SOAP notes. So now let's talk about medical necessity. Let's talk about really how do we actually prove medical necessity, and how are we able to show them that what we're doing fits within their definition of medical necessity. So the best way that I can do that is I have a bicycle wheel here. And you're probably saying, okay, Bharon, so what in the world is a bicycle wheel doing to explain medical necessity? Well, there's a lot of components to a bicycle wheel, but there's 2 main components. The first one is the hub, or what I call the hub of your bicycle wheel. It basically holds the spokes together, which allows all of the weight and the electricity and the energy to be spread through all of the spokes so that the tire can hold up the weight of the person riding. That is your treatment plan. That holds your entire case together. Without your treatment plan, you're not able to even explain anything as far as necessity is concerned. Your spokes are your SOAP notes, right? So think of your treatment plan as your hypothesis, your scientific guess. This is what we believe is going to happen with the patient. Then your SOAP note is, well, did I do what I said I was going to do, and did it have the impact that I thought it was going to have? So you cannot tell medical necessity without both of those. If you ever get a request for medical necessity, you should never, ever, 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 ever send your SOAP notes, because your SOAP notes are not capable of telling the story of necessity in and of themselves. You have to have a treatment plan that puts context to your SOAP notes. And this is why a lot of people will fail an audit or a review, because they never, either they don't have a treatment plan or they don't send it in. All they send in is the SOAP note. And the SOAP note is not built to tell that story. So it's very important that you use both of these things when communicating your medical necessity. But let's give that some framework, because Medicare actually gets very, very detailed about what medical necessity is and how it's defined. So it says this: a patient must have a significant health problem in the form of a neuromusculoskeletal condition necessitating treatment, and the manipulative services rendered must have a direct therapeutic relationship to the patient's condition and provide a reasonable expectation of recovery or improvement of function. The patient must have a subluxation of the spine as demonstrated by X-ray or physical exam. Well, let's look at that part that I've underlined. Right? It says it must have a direct therapeutic relationship to the patient's condition and provide a reasonable expectation of recovery or improvement of function. That doesn't say anything about pain, right? Our profession gets so hung up on pain, and I know why we do, because it's easy to communicate with the patient. They know how they feel, and if we can tell them we can make them feel better, then the conversation is much easier. But Medicare itself doesn't even talk about pain. It talks about improving the function of the patient. So why we still just put so much energy into pain is mind-boggling to me, because it's not even the guidelines. It makes it very easy for them to shut us down, because when there's no longer an existence of pain, there's no longer an existence of necessity. So we need to get back to telling the story of function. That's why I'm telling you that when you're doing your specific treatment goals, it can't be to reduce pain. It's got to be to create some type of quantifiable function. Well, let's dig this a little deeper because they get a little bit more specific. So Medicare actually says there's two types of subluxation. There's a chronic subluxation, and then there's an acute subluxation. An acute, it's considered acute when a patient is being treated for a new injury identified by X-ray or physical exam, where the results of the chiropractic manipulation is expected to be an improvement in, arrest, or retardation of the patient's condition. Pretty straightforward, right? For the record, there's not any of your Medicare patients that will ever start and stop an acute. I'm praying there's a world. Both of my kids are going to be chiropractors. My daughter actually heads to chiropractic school in a year. And so I'm praying that when she's in practice, there will be people that are 65 years or older that have been under chiropractic care their entire life, and they won't be in a chronic state. But as it sits right now, they're going to be in a chronic state. And I'm going to show you a stat when we end this class today that's going to blow your mind about the reality of our healthcare system. So if we look at what they say a chronic condition is, they say it's chronic where the continued therapy can be expected to result in some functional improvement. Once the functional status has remained stable for a given condition without the expectation of additional functional improvement, further manipulative treatment is considered maintenance therapy and is not covered. Right? Let's look at that. Right? It's where you're providing care, but where the continued therapy can be expected to result in some functional improvement. Once the functional status has remained stable for a given condition without expectation of additional functional improvement, further manipulative treatment is considered maintenance therapy. So let me give it to you this way. If you think of a visual analog scale, right, just your T-graph here. So on one end of the spectrum, you have death. On the other end of the spectrum, you have eternal life, right? And if the care you're providing is taking them further from death and closer to ultimate life, then there's a Medicare benefit. I think everyone's pretty clear on that, right? And that's your new patient. We're treating them. We're taking them away from death, giving them closer to ultimate life. Everything's great. The problem is every single one of your patients will hit a wall. They hit that point where they're not going to get any better than what they are. We call this maximum medical improvement, MMI. So once you hit MMI, here's where the dilemma really comes in. So what do we do with that patient? So we typically, most of us will reduce the frequency in which we're seeing the patient, and they all ultimately deteriorate. They'll all start slipping back towards death. And so then we start treating them to get them back, and then we hit that same wall. It's as good as we're going to get them. Then they fall back, and then we treat them. And there's that little wiggle room between those 2 points. That's always the question. Is that medically necessary? Well, unfortunately, one could argue, if you look at the statement down there, it says once the functional status has remained stable and the expectation for further improvement is there, or not there rather, it's not a covered benefit. So that care that we're providing, they hit the wall and then they deteriorate, we're not causing additional improvement. But still, this definition doesn't quite give us everything we need to be able to tell what we should do with those. So that leads us to this, which is directly underneath it within the carrier's manual. And this is the craziest definition I've ever seen in my life. But it says a treatment plan that seeks to prevent disease, promote health, or prolong or enhance the quality of life, or therapy that is performed to maintain or prevent deterioration of a chronic condition is not a Medicare benefit. Once the maximum therapeutic benefit has been achieved for a given condition, ongoing maintenance therapy is not considered to be medically necessary under the Medicare program. I mean, look at that. It says a treatment plan that seeks to prevent disease, promote health, prolong or enhance your quality of life, or a therapy that is performed to maintain or prevent deterioration of a chronic condition is not a Medicare benefit. I mean, once you get done throwing up in your mouth, think about that for a minute. So if we go back to our analogy of our visual analog scale, we're treating them, they get to maximum medical improvement, they start to deteriorate, and we're treating them to get them back to that MMI point. According to this definition, it says a therapy that is performed to maintain or prevent deterioration of a chronic condition is not a benefit. So that care that we're doing to get them back to MMI, according to Medicare, is not covered. That is maintenance. You don't have to like this, but it's very easy. There should be zero confusion whether the patient you're seeing should or should not be an AT modifier or a GA. It should be very, very simple. Either I'm treating them to prevent deterioration or I'm treating them to cause additional improvement. And you're going to be like, well, wait a minute, Bharon. I am causing additional improvement. When they came in, they were hurting. When I got done adjusting, they're not hurting. And I'm like, yes, but if you have to see them every other day to keep that happening, that's maintaining a current state of health. That is not causing additional improvement. You don't have to like it, but it's the way the rules exist. And once you understand the rules, it becomes very, very easy to start managing our patient. Now, you're going to say, well, Bharon, I have Medicare patients that will shoot me if I tell them that Medicare is not going to cover anymore. I get it. I've had them. They're the most entitled group. We say the millennials are entitled. Deal with some Medicare people from time to time, and they are massively entitled people when it comes to their benefit, right? So here's what I want you to do. This verbiage that you're looking at right now, I want you to print that off. I want you to screenshot this, do whatever you need to do, but put that everywhere on your office so that you understand, that your patient understands you are not the one that set these guidelines, that it's Medicare that set them. But nonetheless, those are the guidelines. All right, so let me wrap this up. We're running into our time here. Hopefully this has empowered you a little bit. It shouldn't be scary. This is a very easy process. An hour is a very short period of time for me to really give you the nuts and bolts of this stuff, but hopefully it's at least piqued some interest. And again, I recommend please reach out to me if I have confused you on anything, or if you're walking away from this not wanting to treat a Medicare patient. That is not my objective at all, and I would love an opportunity to change that outcome if that is in case the fact. But I want you to understand the opportunity and the power that we have as a profession. If we come together and we start telling the story of chiropractic the way that it was intended to be told, the power of that story next to the gospel is the most powerful story there is. It changes lives, literally changes lives. It saves lives. We have a world now with the opioid crisis where people are dying. In Ohio, I have 27 people dying a week on properly administered, properly prescribed drugs. 27 people a week. It's insane, and we literally could impact that. So if we come together and tell the story, things are awesome. But let me leave you with some stats, right? The opportunity is that healthcare is in such a flux right now, they don't even know what to do. More and more, every day it seems now, more people are validating chiropractic. I think the latest one that I saw that came out was Harvard. Harvard validated, and they're actually putting chiropractors in their medical school to work and start educating the MDs on what chiropractic does. So the tide is changing. Chiropractic is now becoming more acceptable, which is why it's more and more important that we don't compromise the message of what it is we do. My personal goal in life is to value the adjustment so high that we don't have to do other therapies unless we choose to. But we can live and earn a good income on just adjusting people because the value of the adjustment is understood and people are paying us fairly for it. I think the reason a lot of people get into therapies and adjunct procedures is that it's really a monetary issue, not a belief system. And so if we can value the adjustment and get other people to value it, we can have a very viable clinic just adjusting. But nonetheless, healthcare is in a flux and a crisis, and here's why. So here's a study. This study was actually published in 2015, but it's stats from 2013. And if you look in this column right here, you see these are all the industrialized nations in our world. And the United States is down here, but we spend more money per person on healthcare than any other industrialized nation. As a matter of fact, the next closest nation is Switzerland that spends $6,300, and we spend $9,000 per patient or per person. So that would lead you to believe we probably have the best outcomes, right? Yeah, we have a lot of sick people if we're spending that much money, but if we're spending that much, we must have the best outcomes. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. Look at these numbers, right? So let's look at life expectancy. We're at 78, the lowest of every industrialized nation. Our life expectancy is 78 years old. This is the one that scares me to death. So this is the percentage of the population that are 65 years or older with 2 or more chronic conditions. 68% of our 65-year or older people have 2 or more chronic. Chronic means that they have 2 identified conditions that are regularly managed. 68%, 7 out of 10 people that are 65 years or older have 2 or more chronic conditions. I know for a fact that chiropractic can impact that statistic. If we can get to these people and we're utilized more appropriately, we can change these outcomes. That's what I believe. I live in a world where there's a chiropractor on every maternity ward. There's a chiropractor on staff at every nursing home. There's a chiropractor everywhere because we're utilized appropriately to produce a higher level of functionality and life expression. That's what chiropractic can do, and I'm super excited that you guys are a part of that. So if you look at this, this is the opioid usage, right? Look at our opioid usage. It's unbelievable. It's just skyrocketing over and over and over. Well, this is the power of telling the story. So this is an actual document from Ohio. When I was the executive director of the Ohio State Chiropractic Association, I was honored to serve with my president at the time to go and work with our governor and a specific opioid task force that he had created. The purpose of this was to figure out how Ohio was going to deal with the opioid crisis. I already gave you the stat of 27 people a week that were dying. So in this document, we fought for 18 months with about 20 other specialty groups. There were MDs, hospitals, PTs, everybody were in this room, and chiropractors got a seat at the table. And myself and Dr. Huffer, we just pounded the story of chiropractic, just kept fighting, and it was pretty heated in the beginning. But eventually we were able to produce this. So this document was actually adopted and signed by our governor and put in action in 2016, January of 2016. And here's what it said. It says non-pharmacological therapy should be considered as a first-line therapy for acute pain unless the natural history of the cause of pain or clinical judgment warrants a different approach. These therapies often reduce pain with fewer side effects and can be used in combination with non-opioid medications to increase likelihood of success. Examples may include but are not limited to, and you see everything, and chiropractic adjustment is listed in there. So the state of Ohio said that the first line of defense should be a non-pharmacological intervention, and then it lists different interventions, and chiropractic adjustment was in that. That was a substantial win for us, to be able to get them to understand that we can't start fighting this epidemic by more drugs and different types of drugs, that it must start by dealing with pain non-pharmacologically. And it was an awesome deal. Now, since then, we now have our workers' compensation in the state of Ohio that just adopted in January of this year, that before they'll do any type of back surgery or meds for back pain, they must fail 90 days of chiropractic care. Excuse me, it's physical therapy or chiropractic, but because the chiropractors are working on it, most of them are going to be chiropractors. So they have to fail 90 days before they can get any kind of med or surgery for back pain. That's the ripple effect. And the way this happened was telling the story. So I'm going to leave you with this, my friends. I'm 1 minute over, and I apologize for that. But please don't ever stop telling the story. Hopefully this information has eased your mind about documentation. It's given you a little bit more passion to be able to want to go and tell the story of chiropractic. If there's anything in the world that I can do for you to help you fall back in love with chiropractic, please reach out to me. I'll do everything I possibly can. And Christy and the ChiroHealthUSA team, thank you guys so much for creating such an amazing platform and allowing me to come and express myself a little bit to your people today. So everybody, God bless. We thank you so much and have an incredible remainder of your day.